I have never had a name, not the kind humans give to things they care about. I was never the storm cloud that drew fear or awe, nor the great curtain of rain that washed a land clean. I was just a small thing, drifting, a lone thread of white stretched across the wide Judean sky, unnoticed and uncelebrated, moving as the wind allowed, going where silence led. I never cast a heavy shadow. I brought no thunder, no blessing of water to break the thirst. Yet I have seen everything. I have hovered over Judea long before her people looked up with weary eyes and whispered ancient prayers to a sky that often remained still. They did not see me, and I did not seek to be seen. But I remember the cracked soil and the rhythm of sandals beating paths through the hills. I remember the sound of voices rising at dusk, murmuring stories of a promise, of a light yet to come, of a king unlike any king they had known. I remember the way mothers lifted their children and turned their faces toward the heavens, searching not for rain but for hope. I have watched them for centuries, from above, from just beyond the reach of their longing. My life has been a quiet one, a soft drifting, but my heart, if clouds can have hearts, has been formed by their waiting. Waiting that did not shout, waiting that did not demand, but waiting that bore the weight of generations like stones carried in the chest. I have passed over their rooftops at night, when sleep would not come and old men sat in silence beside dim lanterns, their fingers tracing words written long ago. I have floated above the temples where priests lit incense and whispered names into sacred darkness. I have hovered above girls who prayed not for beauty or favor, but for the redemption of a people too tired to hope boldly. I have seen the stars from the other side, their cold brilliance no comfort to the warmth-starved earth below. I have seen valleys bathed in moonlight and towns cloaked in the soft hush of unmet dreams, and always, beneath me, the eyes of a people who still looked up, still asked, still believed, though not all would admit it. You might think a cloud forgets, that I drift so endlessly I cannot carry meaning, but memory clings to me like dew. I remember a child once, sitting alone beside a field, whispering, "Will he ever come?" She said it into the breeze, into the nothing, not knowing I was there above her, holding her question. I carried it for years. I still do. I do not answer prayers. I do not shape destiny. But I have been the space above every whispered yearning, every silent plea. And there, in that space, something sacred hovers. It is not my doing, but I am its witness. I have never touched the ground, never rested on a roof, never entered a home, yet I have entered the stories of countless hearts. I have seen the hidden trembling of faith. I have watched it falter, then rise again, slow and quiet as my own drifting. I have known the ache of waiting. I have been its companion. For I am a cloud, small and alone, moving through the skies of a land aching for fulfillment. And I am still here, watching, listening, holding the hush between heaven and earth. For something is coming. I feel it not in thunder or blaze, but in the stillness deeper than silence, a stillness that trembles with promise. And I will be here when it breaks. I drifted lower today, close enough to feel the breath of the hills, close enough to see the deep cracks in the earth where olive trees once stood proud. The land is tired. It does not sing the way it once did, when springs ran freely and vines danced in the wind. Now the fields lie bare, bones of harvests long forgotten, and the people walk slower. Their feet still move with purpose, but it is a purpose worn thin by generations of waiting. I hovered above a woman today, her back bent, her hands thick with calluses, her eyes scanning the horizon not for storms or invaders but for signs, for something in the sky to change. She did not see me. She only wiped her brow, whispered something I could not catch, and returned to her labor, as if even the act of hoping had become a quiet, ordinary burden. I do not know her name, but I have seen many like her. Men too, children, elders, each carrying the same question etched beneath their bones. Will deliverance ever come? It is not shouted anymore. That question now lives in gestures, in silences, in the way eyes linger on the heavens a moment longer than necessary. I have learned the language of longing. It is not loud. It is not always coherent, but it is persistent. It curls into the corners of the day, settles into shadows, lives between footsteps. I followed a boy through the outskirts of Bethlehem. He chased a goat along a dry stream bed, laughing with a kind of reckless joy only children still possess. But when he stopped to rest beneath a tree, he looked up. His laughter fell away. There was a weight behind his gaze, as if he had inherited the waiting of his father, and his father before him. I drifted above him, offering no shade, no sign, only my presence. And still he stared, as if he sensed that even silence could be holy. There is something sacred about the way these people wait. They do not always understand what they wait for. Their stories are ancient and tangled. Some speak of a mighty warrior, others imagine a king cloaked in wisdom and fire. Still others dream of a shepherd, gentle and just, but all speak of one. And I, who have heard every version, cannot help but feel the shape of that hope forming slowly in the dust of their lives. It is not sharp or clear, but it is constant. I have passed over their synagogues, heard the voices rise in song and fall again, in weary cadence. I have seen scrolls unrolled with trembling hands, ancient names traced with reverence, and I have hovered in silence, letting their prayers rise through me like mist. They do not know I am there. They do not know that a cloud has memory. But I remember every lifted hand, every tear fallen without sound. I remember the silence that followed the last prophet, the centuries that stretched like desert beyond voice. I remember the wars, the exile, the return that felt more like surviving than triumph. And still, somehow, beneath the ash and ache, they wait. There is something beautiful in that, something terrifying too. For what if hope is all they have, and it is misplaced? What if the silence is all there is? I do not know. I am only a cloud, drifting. But today, as I moved slowly across the sky, I felt something sternate in the heavens, but in the soil, as if the earth itself had begun to remember the promise, as if creation had exhaled and whispered, "Soon." I do not know what it means, but I have drifted for centuries, and never before have I felt the stillness tremble like this. It is not wind, it is not weather, it is something deeper, and I remain, watching, waiting, carrying their silent questions across the sky, not as a burden, but as a calling. There are no seasons for clouds like me. I do not bloom in spring nor fall in autumn. I do not follow the rhythms of planting or harvesting, and I have no use for the rising and setting of moons, though I have watched them all. My only rhythm is that of wandering, of drifting from one sky to the next, carried by winds that do not ask my opinion. And so I have wandered endlessly over this land called Judea, long before men named cities, long before kings built palaces, long before prophets spoke their trembling words into the dust. I have watched a land shaped by waiting. It is a strange thing, this waiting. It has its own breath, its own pulse, and I have felt it deepen over the centuries, becoming something more than longing, more than memory. It has become identity. These people, this tribe, once enslaved, once scattered, once raised and ruined and raised again, they have not lost the art of waiting. I have seen other nations. I have floated above towers that touch the sky, watched empires rise with pride and fall with screams. But here, in this narrow land hemmed in by desert and sea, I have seen something different. Their waiting is not ambition disguised as patience. It is not a thirst for conquest dressed in robes of holiness. No, their waiting is ache. It is hunger. It is a wound they press against the silence of heaven, not to demand healing, but to remember they still bleed. And I, who have no body, no skin, no wound of my own, have come to ache with them. It is a strange thing for a cloud to say, perhaps, but I feel what they do not say. I feel it when I pass over temple steps worn thin by generations of knees. I feel it when I see a father recite ancient prayers over his son, voice steady, eyes tired. I feel it in the songs that do not rise with triumph but with trembling. For a long time, I thought they had forgotten. Their eyes no longer burned with fire. Their voices no longer shook the earth. There were no more prophets, only silence, long and thick and terrible. And I thought, perhaps, the promise had been swallowed by it. But then I began to notice, not loud things, not great awakenings, but small moments, A woman lighting a lamp with more care than needed, as if she expected company. A boy refusing to eat until he whispered thanks to a God he could not see. An old man pausing before the holy place, not to pray, but to listen just in case. It is in these small acts that I feel the waiting has not died. It has simply buried itself deeper. I remember once passing over a village just before dusk. The air was heavy, the light golden and thin. Children chased one another, and the smell of bread reached even me. A man sat alone by the edge of the field, his hands wrapped around his knees. He did not move. He did not look up. But something in him reached, not upward, but inward, as if pulling on a thread of hope too fine to see. I hovered above him for longer than I should have. There was no prayer on his lips, but I could feel it unfinished, unspoken, but real. That night, as the stars returned one by one, I drifted away slower than usual. Something in me, some vapor of memory or echo of presence, lingered behind, unwilling to move on. Perhaps it is foolish, but I have come to believe that even clouds can sense the approach of something holy, not in thunder or spectacle, but in the aching hush that spreads before something breaks. It is in the way people pause without knowing why, the way their songs lower in volume, the way the hills seem to hold their breath. There is a readiness in the land now. It is not loud, but it is deep. I passed over Jerusalem yesterday. The city does not wait well. She is too full of noise and movement. But even there, among the merchants and scholars and soldiers, I sensed a trembling, something beneath the stone, beneath the law. A crack widening, a space being made for something new. I do not know what it is. I only know that the waiting has changed. It is no longer just memory, it is preparation. And I, a cloud with no name and no home, find myself circling lower, drawn to the dust more than ever before. There is something about to happen. I can feel it in the way even the olive trees bend slightly differently in the wind, in the way the ravens fly without calling, in the way the earth, though dry, does not crack but holds firm as if ready. And I am here, as I always have been, above it all, watching, listening, carrying their silent ache like mist around my form. If I had hands, I would hold it. If I had breath, I would whisper comfort. But all I can do is remain, and that, perhaps, is enough. For sometimes, presence is the promise, and I remain. I have never truly understood grief, not in the way humans do. I have no hands to bury the dead, no heart to feel it break, no breath to lose to sobbing. And yet, over these centuries of drifting, I have come to know its shape. It rises from the earth like heat from stone. It clings to rooftops, seeps through doorways, rests in the folds of clothing that once smelled like a loved one now gone. I have seen grief, tasted its silence, carried its weight in my likeness, and among the people of Judea, grief has taken up residence beside waiting, as if they are siblings who share the same cup of bitter wine. There are days when I pass over a town just as the sun begins to set, and I can sense it in the way a man closes his gate without looking back, in the way a woman pauses too long over the name of her lost child during prayer, in the way a girl stares at the stars as if they are too far to love her back. These are not loud griefs. These are quiet ones, ancient, layered, passed down like heirlooms made of shadows. And yet, even in the thick of mourning, there is something else. Not joy not yet, but resolve. I saw it today in the face of an old woman sitting on her rooftop. Her hands were knotted with age, her spine bent like a bow that had long since loosed its final arrow. She sat beside a pot of dry herbs and watched the horizon with eyes that had seen too much. I drifted above her in silence, and she, without looking up, said, "We are still waiting." She said it not as a complaint, not as despair, but as a declaration. I do not think she was speaking to anyone, or perhaps she was, perhaps to the wind, or to God, or to herself, but the words hung in the air, and I caught them. I carry them still. We are still waiting. I have floated above widows, placing stones on graves, above children repeating stories of deliverance, as if trying to believe them for the first time, above scholars whose faith falters in the margins of their scrolls, above rebels who hope violence will hurry what prayer cannot. I have seen grief twisted into anger, into numbness, into ritual, into song. And yet, no matter the shape, it never fully erases the longing. The people still want what was promised. They want more than rescue, they want meaning. They want to know that the pain is not in vain, that the years of silence were not absence, that the heavens, even when still, are not empty. It is a strange and holy defiance, this enduring hope. It does not roar, it does not conquer, but it remains. I followed a caravan through the hills yesterday. Traders mostly. Their camels kicked up dust that clung to my breathless form, and their laughter was laced with fatigue. But one among them, a young man with ink-stained fingers, hummed a tune that did not belong to merchants. It was an old melody, one I'd heard long ago, sung in synagogues, in battlefields, in birth chambers and deathbeds. A song of expectation, a song of maybe soon. He hummed it not loudly and not with great skill, but he hummed it. That, to me, is everything. I have come to understand that grief does not destroy, faith it refines it. It burns away the easy answers, the borrowed beliefs, and leaves behind only what is real, raw, scarred, trembling but real. And that, I believe, is what God listens for. Not perfection, not performance, but truth. I have seen truth rise from the dust in the form of a mother refusing to curse God after losing her child, in a father who still brings offerings though his prayers remain unanswered, in a child who laughs anyway. These moments are more sacred than incense. They rise not just to the sky, but through it. I carry them, though they do not know. I am a cloud. I have no temple, but I am a sanctuary for the unseen things, for longing, for sorrow, for the soft, persistent whisper that says, "We are still waiting." And now, more than ever, I feel the weight of that whisper growing light, as if the waiting is not about to end, but about to begin again differently, as if what is coming is not a conclusion, but a birth. I do not know how I know, but the stars have grown quieter. The wind carries less dust and more pause. Even the animals move with a strange reverence, as if sensing that history is about to shift its gaze. I drift slower now, reluctant to miss what I cannot name. And in the stillness of my passing, I wonder if somewhere, someone is hearing the same whisper I heard on that rooftop. We are still waiting, but not for much longer. If I had the power to shape rain, I would have wept long ago. Not for the lack of water, though the land has begged for it in more ways than words. Not for the heat, though I have watched the sun carve lines into the faces of children before they even had time to forget how to laugh. No, I would have wept for the prayers that never found their answers, for the hands lifted night after night in the same rhythm, only to fall back into silence. I do not know why the heavens remain so still for so long. I only know that I have watched the stillness like a sentinel, hovering, always hovering, caught between the ache of earth and the hush of sky. I remember a particular afternoon not by date, for I keep no calendar, but by feeling. It was quiet, in that deep, aching kind of way where even the birds refused to sing. The village below was still, the roads empty, the doors closed against the heat. But behind one of those doors, something sacred was unfolding. I cannot see through roofs, but I can feel the pulse of a whisper, the hush of breath held too long, the exhale of a name spoken for the first time in years. And I knew, in that moment, that someone was praying not for deliverance, not even for change, but simply for God to remember. That prayer, that gentle pleading, settled into me like a drop of water on stone. I have carried it ever since. You see, it is not always the loud cries that reach furthest. Sometimes it is the whisper, the barely formed question, the breathless wondering of a soul too tired to articulate its hope. That is what heaven hears most clearly. And I, being nothing but vapor, have somehow become the vessel of these small, persistent acts of faith. Over time, I began to notice the shift not just in the people, but in the earth itself. The fig trees bloomed a little earlier. The sheep wandered closer to town. The wind changed direction more often, as if uncertain where it should go. And I began to circle more tightly above certain places. Nazareth, Bethlehem, the hills near Hebron, places that once seemed ordinary, now hummed with invisible expectancy. I could not explain it, but I felt it in my drifting. Something was stirring, not loudly, not like fire, but like a heartbeat, soft and steady, growing stronger. I have watched the stars fall and rise. I have seen kingdoms crumble, rebuilt, and crumble again. But never have I sensed what I sense now. The waiting is different. It is no longer just sorrow holding its breath. It is anticipation. Something holy is near. I hovered above a group of shepherds 2 nights ago. They were camped in the valley, gathered around a small fire, laughing, arguing, chewing on bread too dry to swallow without wine. And yet, as the youngest of them lay back and stared into the sky, I felt his chest rise with something more than breath. He did not speak, but he looked at me, or through me, and for a moment I thought, maybe he feels it too. This shift, this holy pause before the divine speaks again. I wanted to descend, to wrap him in mist, to let him know he was not imagining things. But I remained aloft, as always, holding space for the unseen. And now, every time I drift across the horizon, I wonder which roof, which road, which quiet corner will become the place where the silence ends. I will be there. I have to be. I was made for this to be the soft canvas against which heaven paints its most intimate promises. Not thunder, not lightning, but presence. That is all I have ever offered. And perhaps that is what the people have needed most all along. Not noise, not spectacle, but presence. The quiet certainty that they are not alone. That someone, even if it is only a nameless cloud, has seen their waiting and found it holy. I continue to move, slower now, closer to the earth, listening for the sound of the promise about to take flesh. Long before the scrolls were unrolled and read in hushed rooms, long before the songs of the prophets echoed in the dry hills, even before men began to measure time by rains and wars and harvests, I was there. I have drifted above this land for what feels like forever, though I do not measure eternity. My presence is soft, weightless, without time. And yet, through the centuries, one voice has lingered louder than the rest. His name was Isaiah. I do not remember what his face looked like. I never saw his eyes, but I remember his words, carried on the wind like the scent of crushed myrrh, sharp and sweet and unforgettable. A child will be born. A son will be given. I have carried those syllables like a melody stitched into the fibers of my form. I have watched them rise and fall in the memory of this land, passed from father to son, scribed onto scrolls, whispered by lips too tired to shout. They called him a prophet. I only know that his voice refused to die. For centuries, his words have hovered beneath me like embers, glowing in the ashes of exile, of despair, of silence. I remember floating above a group of children once, their teacher reciting the passage from memory, his voice trembling slightly as he reached the part about the wonderful counselor, the Prince of Peace. The children fidgeted, bored, hungry, distracted. But one of them, a girl with dust in her hair and a stone clenched in her hand, looked up. Straight up, her eyes searched the sky as if she expected that prince to arrive at that very moment. I hovered above her, stunned by the purity of her belief. She did not question the words. She simply waited for them to become flesh. I have not forgotten her, or the way the teacher paused, watching her, as if reminded of why he spoke the words at all. Isaiah's words do not age. They do not fade. I have heard them in marketplaces, on battlefields, beside deathbeds, and in wedding feasts. They are stitched into the breath of this people. But more than the words, it is the hunger behind them that clings to me. They are not memorized to honor the past. They are whispered to awaken the future. I remember another voice, this one quiet, old, nearly broken, reciting. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. It was spoken over a grave, by a father burying his son. He said it not with rage, but with resignation, as if he had come to understand that the promised one would not arrive wrapped in triumph, but in tears. I carried that scene with me for days, unable to rise above it. It was then I began to realize that the people no longer dreamed of a warrior. They had seen enough warriors. What they longed for was a companion in suffering, someone who would not come to crush their enemies, but to carry their sorrow. The words of Isaiah had begun to reshape the waiting itself, and I, drifting always, noticed that the hope below me had changed texture. No longer hard and sharp, it had softened. It had become intimate. It no longer demanded thunder, it whispered for a presence. I drifted lower these past nights, circling the same village, though I did not know why. The air felt heavy with something more than weather, and in the dark hours, I heard a woman singing, not a song of joy, a lullaby. Her voice was cracked, thin, but full. She sang of light in the darkness, of a child who would not be feared but loved. I do not know if she knew Isaiah's words by heart, but I knew she was singing them, not line by line, but in spirit. And as I hovered above her roof, I imagined that perhaps Isaiah himself had once looked to the sky and seen me there, a solitary cloud, a sign of nothing, and yet present. Perhaps he too wondered if his words would be carried like seeds in the wind, landing in places he would never see. They were, they are. I carry them still. Sometimes I wonder if that is why I exist at all, to remember. Not to speak, not to reign, not to change anything, just to remember, and perhaps in that remembering, to remind that he promised, that he still remembers, and that he is not far. That night, everything waited. The sky, the soil, the breath of the hills, even the silence, it all paused. I knew the difference. I have drifted through many nights across this land, each one cloaked in the same stillness that coats forgotten things. But this night was not forgettable. It did not carry the sharp bite of prophecy or the fierce ache of mourning. It held something quieter, deeper, a hush not born of absence but of fullness. I felt it before I saw it, a drawing in of breath across the stars, a soft pull in the atmosphere, as if the very heavens had turned their faces toward a single point on earth. And then I saw it, a star, unfamiliar and yet so certain in its being that I knew it had always belonged here, even if it had only now made itself known. It was not like other stars that flicker and fade, that dance in their constellations with stories already carved into them. This one had no story yet told, and yet I felt that it carried all stories within it. It did not blaze, it burned inwardly. Its glow pulsed like a heartbeat. It moved not with the careless drifting of heavenly bodies obeying unseen mathematics, but with a kind of hunger, like it knew where it was going. And so I followed. I had no reason not to. I had followed wind and weather and the silent wail of generations. Now I followed a light. We passed over fields that had gone dry with waiting, over roads worn down by the rhythm of sandals and sorrow. We passed over the ruins of what once were hopes and the stones that had once been thrown. No one below stirred. No one looked up. But we moved, toward something, toward someone. The star did not rush. It carried the kind of slowness that only comes with certainty. And then we reached it, a place so small it barely held its own name. Bethlehem. I had hovered over it before. I knew the rooftops patched with prayers and fatigue. I knew the shadows that clung to its corners. But tonight, the town felt hollowed out and hallowed all at once. The star stopped, and I did too. Below us was no palace, no altar, no army, just a structure cut into stone, its opening half covered in cloth that barely kept out the night. A cave? A stable? The line had blurred, but from within came a warmth not of fire, but of presence. The star lowered its light until it bathed only the entrance, and then it waited, like me. Inside, I heard breath, shallow, quiet, rhythmic, two voices whispering, the words too soft to catch, but heavy with the weight of wonder. And then a third voice joined them, not formed in speech, but in a cry, a newborn's cry, sharp, sudden, holy. I did not expect to feel what I felt. That sound split me in ways storms never had. I, who had carried centuries of weeping, recognized in this cry not despair, but incarnation. The sound echoed upward into me, and I knew not with thought, but with knowing beyond thought that everything had just changed. I moved lower. Below me, a woman cradled the child, her arms trembling not from effort, but from the sheer magnitude of what they held. Her eyes were wet, not from pain, but from the kind of awe that does not need explanation. The man beside her looked at them both, his hands open in helpless reverence. He did not know what to do, so he did nothing. And in that stillness, the world held its breath. The child whimpered, moved, breathed. He had no crown, no sign, just skin. and yet every inch of creation seemed to lean in toward him. Even the dust at the doorway stilled. Even the animals nearby, their breath visible in the cold, turned their eyes without understanding. And the star? It pulsed brighter not as a signal, but as an answer. This was the place. This was the moment. The Word had become flesh, not in gold or glory, but in straw and silence. I hovered, aching with the weight of beauty. I, a cloud born to drift and dissolve, had seen the invisible become seen, had heard the eternal draw its first human breath. I thought of the long years, the prayers unanswered, the voices gone hoarse with crying out. I thought of Isaiah, of his trembling hands and burning lips. I thought of every widow who had whispered to the sky, every exile who had sung through tears, every child who had stared upward and asked, when? It had all led here. And now, no one was looking up. They would learn later. But I saw first, not because I was worthy, simply because I was present. I watched as the mother wrapped him tighter. I watched as she kissed his forehead, unaware she had touched the face of God. I watched as the man whispered his name, afraid to say it too loudly. Yeshua, salvation. The name had found a body. I stayed until the first shepherds arrived, wild-eyed and breathless from a message not born of books but of angels. They knelt, not as ritual, but as instinct. The star remained. So did I, because sometimes presence is the only act of worship left. And that night, I worshipped in silence, cloaked in mist, wrapped around a sky that would never be the same. By dawn, the star had not moved, and neither had I. Beneath us, the small town of Bethlehem remained still, unaware of how the axis of the world had tilted quietly in the night. Nothing had exploded. No armies marched. No empires fell in that hour. But something more enduring than all of them had taken root in the dark, in straw, in skin. I hovered, my form stretched thin across the early morning sky, not from exhaustion, but from reverence. I had witnessed many beginning seasons shifting, children born, prophets raised, but never a beginning like this. This was not simply the start of a new story. This was the arrival of the author, and yet it came so gently, wrapped not in spectacle but in surrender. The baby now slept, his tiny chest rising and falling with the fragile rhythm of new breath. His mother, her hair tangled with birth and sweat, leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes. Her fingers still rested on the child, as if unsure that he was real. And the man, still half kneeling, half standing, watched them both with the kind of silence that speaks more than word. All three were wrapped in light, not seen but sensed. It wasn't glow, it was gravity. Everything in me, in the sky, in the land, was being drawn toward them, toward him. I did not know what it meant, only that I had never felt such stillness charged with such fullness. It was like watching the sea hold its own tide. Then, slowly, the shepherds arrived, one by one at first, then in cautious pairs, then in a small group, their breaths fast, their eyes wide with something between wonder and fear. They looked up at the star, then at the small building, and hesitated. Their hands clutched staffs, their feet unsure. These were not men used to light. They lived by night, by wind, by instinct. But some voice heard not in the ears, but in the heart had led them here. And when they stepped inside and saw the child, they fell, not like worshippers in temples, but like men whose legs had forgotten how to stand. They knelt in dirt, eyes full, mouths open, their hands empty but stretched forward, as if in offering, and two watched all of it. Above them, above him, I hovered like a witness caught in a dream too real to explain. I had seen kings crowned, I had seen temples rise from dust, I had seen offerings burn and armies clash and prophets shout into wind, but I had never seen a silence so holy that it silenced everything else. That stable became the center of the world, not in size or grandeur, but in meaning. And all around it, things began to change, not loudly, not even visibly, but the hills felt it, the animals felt it, the trees bent in a way they had not done before. Even the stones beneath me, though unmoved, now held story. I drifted outward a little, letting my presence spread across the town. No one else was awake yet. Windows remained shuttered. Pots rested empty beside doors. But inside a handful of homes, I could feel stirring. A dream here, a restless breath there, souls waking to something they could not name. The child had not spoken a word, but already he was calling them, calling the world, and the call did not come through thunder, but through the stillness itself. I found myself gliding low across the hills again, carried by something deeper than breeze. I passed over olive groves where the leaves rustled not with wind but with memory. I moved across vineyards sleeping through the season, and I saw them differently, now not as crops, but as promises. Every vine whispered of the one who would one day call himself the true vine. Every rock I had passed over 1,000 times now carried the echo of the cornerstone. I drifted further until I reached the desert's edge, where the air turned harsh and dry. Even here, I felt it. The silence had changed. It had a center now, a pulse, a name. And then I saw him, not the child, but another figure standing on a distant ridge, far from Bethlehem. A man, rough hands, eyes like storm. He did not know yet, not fully, but something in his posture, in the way he scanned the horizon as if searching for a sign. He was listening. He would speak of the child one day. He would call him the Lamb of God. But for now, he stood still, unaware that the one he would one day baptize had been born in a cradle of straw. I moved past him, slow and quiet, returning to the village that now held more light than its lamps could cast. The star was still there. It had not dimmed. It hovered with the patience of one who knows the end from the beginning, and beneath it, in the arms of a girl who had once said yes to a question too large for words, the infant stirred again. His hand opened, curled, then stilled, and in that tiny gesture, the sky exhaled. I had never felt peace like that, not even above the temple at its most reverent, not even above the scrolls when first unrolled. This was peace not made by men, but sent by God. Not declared by decree, but born in a breath. And I, who had seen so many promises spoken, now saw one kept. A promise wrapped in swaddling cloth, a kingdom beginning in weakness, a word spoken not in thunder, but in the whisper of an infant's cry. I stayed until morning broke, not just the sky, but the world. The morning light arrived, not as a blaze, but as a soft unrolling of gold across the edge of the sky. I, who had hovered through the deepest night, watched as the world began to stir. But something had shifted. Light no longer just illuminated, it revealed. It was as if every ray had learned to carry meaning. The village of Bethlehem remained quiet, its houses stretching awake slowly, their shutters creaking open like eyelids unused to such clarity. But the center of the silence, the child, the mother, the man remained hidden to most. Only the shepherds had seen. They left before dawn, their footsteps hasty, their words half-spoken in disbelief. But their eyes, those eyes, had changed. I saw it as they looked up at me, squinting, scanning the sky not for signs, but in gratitude. They would tell others, though many would not believe them. They would speak of angels and songs, of light and newborn skin, but no telling would match the weight of what they had seen. I watched them go, watched their backs shrink against the rising light, and I did not move. I remained above the stable, not out of duty, but out of devotion. For the child still lay below, wrapped now in sleep as deep as the night had been, his breath steady, his fists loosened, his mother dozing beside him, her hair falling across her brow like a veil of spent strength. The man Joseph, I had learned, stood at the entrance, his arms crossed not in pride, but in the tension of someone who had chosen to protect what he could not understand. He watched the village slowly awaken, and I could feel in him the quiet fear of responsibility, how to raise a promise, how to guard a mystery. I drifted lower, just enough to sense the movement in the air. Inside the dwelling, the light changed, not just from the sun, the kind of light that comes when one world brushes against another. I do not have eyes, but I have memory. And what I witnessed next pressed itself into the heart of my being like nothing before. A caravan approached, slowly, silently, the sound of hooves on dirt, the shuffle of foreign robes, the gleam of metal containers. Men from lands beyond Judea, scholars, sages, wanderers of stars. They had followed that light, the one that had rested beside me, for weeks, maybe longer, and now they stood before a home too small for royalty, bowing in reverence to a child too young to raise his own head. They did not speak at first. They removed their gifts with care, gold, fit for a king, frankincense for worship, myrrh for death. 3 symbols placed at the feet of one who would live all 3 truths. Their eyes did not wander, their hands did not tremble. They had traveled far, across deserts and dangers, not for spectacle, but for worship. And they had found what they sought, not on a throne, but on the lap of a peasant girl. The child reached toward them, not out of understanding, but instinct. And they smiled. One wept. I watched them kneel, not as conquerors, but as men who had found the end of a question. And I understood then, more than ever, that this birth had not come only for shepherds or prophets or a single nation. It had come for the world. The heavens had made their descent into the smallest possible space, a human form. And I, a cloud formed only of water and air, was witnessing the reconciling of everything. After the Magi left, their footprints remained for a while in the soft soil, marking the path between seeking and finding. I followed them briefly, hovering just above the road. They spoke softly to one another, words thick with wonder. One turned back, one last glance at the place they had left. I drifted beside him. He raised his eyes, and for a moment, I believe he saw me, not as shape, not as sign, but as presence. And that was enough. I returned before nightfall. I always return. The dwelling was quieter now. No visitors, no songs, just the hum of a new life settling into the rhythms of earth. Mary moved gently, her body already adapting to the dance of motherhood. She did not speak often, but I could feel her thoughts, like incense rising from her heart. She remembered the angel, she remembered her yes, and now she held the consequence of that yes in her arms, flesh warm and heavy. She did not ask why me, she simply held. Joseph, too, watched her. His movements were precise, protective, but in his eyes I sensed questions he did not voice. Not because he lacked faith, but because he understood that some mysteries are not given to be solidly kept. I rose again that evening, spreading myself across the cooling sky. The star still hovered, though dimmer now, its task nearly complete. I stayed close, not as companion, but as disciple. I had seen what I was not meant to miss, and I knew the world below would soon carry on, unaware of the divine heartbeat now ticking among them. Soldiers would march, laws would change, scribes would write, but beneath all of it, a child would grow. And one day, they would learn his name. I, who had no voice, had seen the Word made flesh. I, who had no home, had hovered above the place where God laid his head. I, who had watched the ache of centuries, had witnessed the beginning of their healing. And I will remember it. Until my mist dissolves and my form forgets the wind, I will remember. The night silence became song, the breath of heaven became a baby, and the cloud became a witness. Time, as men know it, began to move again. The world resumed its rhythms low, stubborn, familiar. Merchants returned to their scales. Children resumed their games. The bells of the temple rang at their appointed hour. But I, who had hovered above the night of nights, knew the measure of things had changed. Not in how the sun moved or how the stars turned, but in meaning. Meaning now walked among them in flesh, unseen for now, but no less real. I lingered above Bethlehem for many days, unwilling to drift far. Though clouds are not made to stay, I resisted the pull of the sky. I returned each morning, each dusk, circling above the small home where the child now opened his eyes to light. I watched his mother learning the patterns of his breath, his needs, his mystery. I saw Joseph rise early to fetch water, to carve wood, to keep the world from intruding too quickly. I saw the animals settle into new rhythms, quiet in his presence. Even they knew. They do not speak, but they sense. I have watched birds flee storms, lambs cry out at the scent of wolves, oxen tremble before earthquakes. But these creatures domesticated, simple rested calmly near him, as if they recognized something older than fear. The days were gentle. The child slept often, fed often, cried sometimes. It was so ordinary. And yet, nothing was ordinary now. The sky, which had once stretched indifferent above the griefs and joys of earth, now stretched like a veil between realms, thinner, nearer. I saw the starlight soften its tone. I saw the winds shift their course to avoid disturbing the peace of that house. I saw time itself bend a little, slower near him, as if not wanting to rush the unfolding of eternity in limbs still learning to move. I drifted higher after a while, not because I was finished, but because something in me knew this chapter of watching was coming to a close. The Magi had left. The shepherds had returned to their fields. Only the family remained now, wrapped in the humility of survival. The world did not yet know what had happened. Rome did not stir. Jerusalem did not tremble, but I had seen enough to understand that the greatest moments begin not in noise, but in nearness. I returned often in the days that followed, even as the house began to change. I watched as Mary grew stronger. I watched as Joseph carried the boy outside to feel the warmth of sunlight. I watched as other children passed by, unaware, and yet I wondered if some flicker of recognition passed through them, only half-formed. I had seen many children before, but this one carried the gravity of all creation in his gaze, even before he could focus it. One morning, something shifted again, not in the sky, in the air. I drifted closer, cautious. Inside, Joseph packed quickly. Mary held the child tighter than usual. Their faces were tense, but not panicked. There had been a dream. I could feel its weight still hanging in the room, like smoke that would not rise. Danger had found them. The king, the one in Jerusalem, had learned of the child, and now his wrath moved quietly through the streets, disguised in the armor of soldiers. I followed them as they fled by night, by silence, through paths only the brave or the desperate take. I hovered above them the entire journey, stretching my form as wide as possible to shield them from the harshest rays, to hide them when scouts passed near. Clouds cannot choose where they go, but I did not drift. I remained. They journeyed for days, toward Egypt, toward exile. I had watched this road before, walked by Israel in another lifetime, but this time, the exile was different. This time, God walked among them. I watched as Mary nursed the child beneath a fig tree, her eyes scanning the road behind them. I watched Joseph stand watch at the edge of sleep, his fingers clutched tight around the staff he had once used for shaping wood. And I watched the boy, always the boy, sleep through it all, trusting, vulnerable, radiant with a light only heaven could see. We crossed the border under moonlight. Egypt welcomed them not with open arms, but with anonymity. And sometimes that is all one needs to survive. I hovered there, too, unfamiliar with this sky, and yet unwilling to leave. I had not known why I lingered so long. Clouds pass, they do not dwell, but now I understood. I was not merely a witness to birth, but a bearer of the silence that cradles sacred things. I had not seen the whole story, I had seen its first breath, and that was enough. I would not stay forever. One day, I would drift far, perhaps never return. One day, the boy would grow, would speak, would call fishermen from their boats and children from their hiding places. He would weep, he would bleed, he would rise. But for now, he slept, and I hovered above him, not because he needed me, but because I had nowhere more holy to be. I am a cloud. I have no name, no voice, no purpose, it seemed. Until that night, when silence was filled with the cry of God becoming man. And now, though no one remembers, I do. I carry the memory of what the earth itself trembled to receive. I was there when heaven touched the straw. I was there when light borrowed flesh. I was there when the infinite inhaled the scent of hay and humanity. And I remain, for as long as I am able, a silent keeper of glory hidden in a child's breath.